Mr. Chairman, all I can say is I sent my slides to Splash Omni Media, I think to Matt at Splash Omni Media yesterday. And I said, I need a really high-res picture of a well-known loser. That's what I got. So y'all can deal with that later on. I am not guilty there. Hey, listen, back in 2003, University of Alabama football team was in chaos. We had won the national championship in '92, which was great, and then 10 years in the desert, probation, all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And in 2003, they went way out to Washington State, to wherever Washington State is, and hired a guy named Mike Price. And they brought Mike Price in, and he came in December, went through spring with football team, a lot of fanfare. He was like coach of the year before that. I think he was making $300,000-400 grand out there. They brought him in and said, we'll pay you $10 million over 7 years. That was in 2003. I mean, since our government decided to print $6 trillion, that's like $1 billion today, I think, all right? So he tripled his salary. He's going through the spring, and in May of that year, he went down to a golf tournament in Pensacola, took the University of Alabama credit cards, wound up probably having a few too many adult beverages, found himself at a gentleman's club, which is one of the great oxymorons of all time, and then in a hotel on the company card where some lady of unknown name wound up running up $1,000 on the card. Oh yeah, and he was married. Oh yeah, and he bought a house in Tuscaloosa. And he brought his kids with him, and they had both bought houses in Tuscaloosa because they were going to be his assistants. He was set up for life, and he missed a great, great opportunity. I remember being home at that time. I was with my dad, and for whatever reason, I was living here at that time, moved here in 2000. I was at home, and they assembled the board of trustees, and he'd already been through spring football with the guys, and the guys really liked him, seemed like a fun guy, and so they had this, colleges have these huge boards, and they're all sitting in a room, and they have this president, his name's Dr. Whitt, and he was like this tall, because I remember when he was behind the podium, you could barely see him, and he's new at the University of Alabama. The University of Alabama is kind of a football team that has a university, right? And so he's got all this pressure, Paul Bryant Jr. in the room, all this stuff going on. And so he has to get the advice of the board, but it's his call. And football players came in teary-eyed, begging to keep the coach, like, let's give him a break, let's believe in grace, let's give him a second chance. And multiple people spoke, and then they went into executive, and then Dr. Whitt came out, and I told my dad, I was like, if he passes over this, like, I'm done. And I'm diehard. It might have been a bluff, but I'm like, I'm done. You just can't do that. But I was afraid that the 20-year-olds in the room who were crying and begging to keep him, because it's May. I mean, fall camp starts August 1st. You can't fire a coach in May. Dr. Whitt stepped to the podium, and in a great, great moment of just moral courage, just said that the University of Alabama, to be the head coach there is a high and prestigious honor. Wasn't really at that time, but it's a high and prestigious honor. It has great responsibility. Coach Price didn't meet the responsibility, and he's fired effective immediately, and we'll start a coaching search tomorrow. Solemn time, hard time. But for that guy in that room with all those board members who hired this guy, and his football team crying and the whole thing about to seemingly wash down, he showed great, great moral courage. And it was beautiful. University of Alabama left there and went on a coaching search and found two great assistants. One was named Mike Shula, the son of Hall of Famer Don Shula, who played at Alabama. Another one was Sylvester Croom, who was defensive coordinator at Green Bay. They were neck and neck, last two candidates, and Sylvester Croom was one of the first African Americans to play football at the University of Alabama. And when it was neck and neck, the last two, Alabama, the place where George Wallace stood in the schoolhouse doors and refused entrance to the first African Americans, Alabama had the opportunity to be the very first SEC school to welcome in an African American as head coach. They lost a great opportunity. They took Mike Shula, he took us 3 more years in the desert. And Mississippi State capitalized on that opportunity and brought in Sylvester Croom. Opportunities. I want to talk to you today about opportunities. How to capture opportunities, but more specifically, how do you capture different opportunities at different stages of life? Like Mike Price, he lost a $10 million opportunity. I've never lost a $10 million opportunity because I never had an opportunity more than worth $1,000 or something. But anybody's got any seven-figure opportunities you want to talk about? Let's talk about those after this. University of Alabama lost a great opportunity to cement something in history. But now that I'm 52 years old, I think 52, 53, Carrie, remind me later, somewhere in there, you lose count at some point. But we're into my 50s. You look back, and there's different opportunities you can get at different times in life. So let me buzz through and talk to you guys today about how to not be a loser. And when I say don't be a loser, I don't want you to lose opportunity in life because it doesn't always come knocking again. We're all going to miss some. Nobody bats 1,000. But I don't want you to miss a lot, and they look different at different stages of life. 18 years old. You guys remember what it used to be like to be 18? That's what 18 looks like. Isn't that fun? Just to remember that, like nothing hurts. You got lots of energy, right? You can actually take your shirt off like it was back in the day, right? Those days leave like right after 30. So, but 18, you cruise through 18 and there's lots of life and lots of zest. And then 21 comes and you graduate and you get kicked into the world of real adulting. My daughters are 20, 22, 25. It's just fun to watch them cross over into real adulting. And then when you get into real adulting in your 20s, if you don't want to be a loser, you better be a great learner. If you don't want to be a loser, be a great learner in your 20s. Did you know that your brain is actually working at its peak in memory at about 18 to 20? That people argue about where it peaks at different things, but in processing information, it's at its peak during its 20s, and you just got all kinds of opportunities to learn lots of things. Now, it doesn't get really great at decision making till sometime in your 30s, I'm pretty sure. But it is humming in your 20s, and in your 20s, if you're a great learner, you can put all kinds of skills and things in your toolbox that you will use to build houses later on. I was cruising down to Columbia not long ago, and I forget what for, and I'm talking on my phone and putting out fires and come off I-26 and hit that great speed trap at Elmwood. I think I was doing about 55, never slowed down because I was handling something on the phone. I got pulled over. Guy pulled me in the parking lot. And I'm just so guilty. There's nothing I can say. And he comes and gets my license, and I can't even argue the point. I'm just going to pay my ticket and move on. And he comes back and he hands me my license. He doesn't hand me a ticket. And I was like, man, that's really generous. And he goes, yeah, well, you guys were CDLs. Like, I try not to punish you guys. I kind of forgot I had a CDL. You know why? I got a CDL in my 20s, and it's still keeping me from getting tickets in my 50s, right? I mean, you just learn stuff in your 20s. You put that little tool in your tool belt, and it pays off later on. It absolutely does. When I was mentoring a lot of people and pastoring, people get paralyzed in their 20s about what should I do? What can I do? And I'm going, I don't really care what you do. If you do something with excellence, it's going to pay dividends for decades. Just whatever you do it with excellence, and it will pay off. Einstein, they talk about theory of relativity. You know when he came up with theory of relativity? 26. A lot of great discoveries are made by people in their 20s. Why? Because it's a great time of learning. You're not really boxed into old ways of thinking, and it can be super, super productive. In my 20s, Carrie and I actually, we went over and lived in Russia for 3 years and lived in an economy at that time where everybody made less than $100 a month. The economy was in free fall. They had 1,300% inflation. Their currency totally collapsed. It was so bad they had to reprint it, cut 6 zeros off, and start over. I lived through that. Like, it changed part of the way I view life. Just a little information point in your 20s. But the biggest thing in my 20s is I grew up in Gadsden, Alabama. My dad ran a construction company literally out of our living room. He had one of those, his secretary was one of those very first answering machines, kind of had the reel-to-reel type deal. And he'd come in and listen to the reel-to-reel. But what he would also do is he would take me, and sometimes my brother, sometimes separately, and he did mostly room additions. He found out a way to get them financed through FHA, and he would drop me at a house, and he would walk around, and he would mark off a room addition, and you got to dig a foundation 22 inches wide, 8 inches deep. You step down. He'd throw me out with a shovel, a pickaxe, and an old Coleman thing where you get some water. And he'd go, son, dig this foundation. You just out there alone digging all day. And he would come in, he would slip in. My dad went to college for 3 years and then kind of partied his way out and never made it back. And he would say, son, you don't want to dig these ditches all your life? You'll go get a civil engineering degree, you'll be a civil engineer. I didn't even know what a civil engineer was till I was a junior at the University of Alabama. I was thinking I was in construction management. But I went and got a civil engineering degree at the University of Alabama because my dad had me digging ditches and he kept planting that seed. This is how you don't dig ditches. This is how you get through it. So I got that degree. I worked as a civil engineer a couple years. And then Carrie and I, that's when we moved to Russia. We spent 3 years there, freezing in the frozen tundra. Had a great experience, and then went into ministry and did a wide variety of things over 20 years. But then in 2014, I had this crazy thought, and I ran for town council and got on town council. And you know what the vast majority of things you do on town council? Are you dealing with stormwater? You're dealing with sewer issues. You're dealing with land development. You're dealing with traffic. All that stuff I studied way back there when I was 20 and 21, and my brain was actually fresh because my dad told me, you don't want to dig ditches, son. The things that you can pile into your brain in your 20s, it's amazing that they always come back around. And so when you're in your 20s, be a great learner. And then when you come out of your 20s, you go into your 30s, and 30s is like a blur. Anybody remember your 30s? If you're not there, you probably don't, because in your 30s, what happens a lot of times is you begin families and you got kids, and I always say they're not at the self-feeding, self-cleaning stage, right? So they need everything. They don't even self-entertain. So you're at work and you're at home and you're trying to learn to be a leader in your job and in your home. And in your work, if you learn some skills in your 20s, there's some people who want you to lead in your 30s. They're begging for you to lead because you go from doing things to leading people. And things are a lot easier than people. And so that's a huge learning curve. But in your 30s, I used to tell my kids, and it's true, you will learn some of your best and most valuable lessons about how to be a great leader by serving under people that are less than great leaders. Don't worry about it. I mean, it's ideal if you can serve under a great leader. If you can, you take a pay cut and you get there. But if you can't, you serve under people that are less than great leaders, like us all, and you learn some of those great lessons. I'll never forget the first time I was handed a packet of information that I was asked to publicly support, and it had been going on in the back and behind the scenes for 6 months, and when it was handed to me, like it was all glossy and printed out. How do you think that went? that doesn't work. So it was a reminder for me all along that you can't roll out a finished product to the people on your team. You got to take them on the journey. And so in your 30s, you have this unique opportunity to learn leadership. My oldest daughter, Lena, was able to go play volleyball at Ole Miss. Her and her teammates actually came up with a list of team values, core values they wanted to live out during season. Wrote it on a piece of paper and stuck it up in the locker room. But it was theirs. And one of their coaches, and this is in the SEC, right? I mean, they had like a team of, seemed like 60 people coaching this volleyball team of 16 with that SEC money. One of their coaches took it down and put up a nice pre-printed plaque of the core values he wanted for the team. How do you think that worked out? It was like, how does that happen? And I just said, make a data point in life you're learning leadership. You'd rather have 60%. If you're the coach, you'd rather have 60% of what you want on the paper they came up with as opposed to the 100% of the stuff you put up and they mock. Leadership's hard. You got to learn it in your 30s. But if you don't want to be a loser in your 30s, don't let the busyness of all these things keep you from the most important things. I had a conversation with a young man recently that a friend had put me in touch with, and we kind of have similar backgrounds. He'd read this book I wrote, and so we have some poverty in our backgrounds, and if you come from a poverty-type situation, I always say you always feel like poverty is nipping at your heels. It messes with your security in life. And so he was he was kind of walking in those roads, but he's 15 years behind me. And I was explaining to him, I said, you know, some things in life can only be communicated through extravagance. Like, I didn't do this well, but with your kids, you better be extravagant in some things. You can't just be normal, because you can't communicate the depth of what you want to communicate without extravagance. We had that conversation, I think 2 weeks later. He loaded up his 10-year-old daughter, took her to New York City for 2 days, something he never would have contemplated. And it was one of the proudest moments in my 52-year-old life, to watch a guy jump out of the busyness of 30s and do something extravagant that was a legacy move. 30s. 30s are a blur. And then you get into your 40s. And in your 40s, the beautiful thing you can do is you can leverage all of the skills you learned in your 20s and hopefully the leadership that you learned in your 30s, and you can leverage that for really whatever you want. Hopefully you'll leverage it for your family, for your community, for your friends, for your faith, for all of those things. That's really where it pays dividends. But our culture, a lot of times, it talks about 50 like 50's just gone, right? Like in your 40s, you need to kind of hunker down. I lost something there. You need to kind of hunker down and run towards safety in your, y'all hear me? Okay. You need to hunker down and run towards safety in this time of life instead of leveraging for things that matter. So I obviously don't buy into that philosophy, but in your 40s, your ability to leverage is great. You can leverage to start a new business. I call it a time of creation. You can create a new business, create a new network, you create a nonprofit. You can do all kinds of things in the realm of creation. I was able to create multiple things out of that leverage. And I want to share a few stories out of that, because when I was creating, I was in creation mode. I remember I was right at 40, and I was in one of those places, you know, where you can retire, where things work, everything's easy, it's great. But I had this vision of doing something else. And like many of you who started your own business, you have this vision of doing something else. And I remember thinking about doing something else. And when you take that jump, you have some people that are for you and have some people who think you're crazy. And I remember somebody asked me, like, Todd, how are you going to support your family? And, you know, I had been a missionary and a pastor for a bunch of years. Like, you know, there are no golden parachutes and those kinds of things. There's just golden retirements, right? And so I had 2 months. I could take care of my family for 2 months. And this one gentleman said, how are you going to take care of your family? Which caused me pause. Big deal. But I made the jump, and my wife supported me as she always does. And right after I made the jump, there was another guy who was in his 50s who was ready to leverage. And he stepped in and he said, Todd, what do you need for your first year? So I think I need $54,000, my family of 5, to keep us above water for this first year. And he wrote a check. And I joined John Reeves, who's here at Radius Church. It was about 75 of us in a lunchroom over at Midway that the district had graciously allowed us to be at for a long, long time. And this gentleman used what he had learned and how he had led to leverage for me. And the money was great, because otherwise I was going to work and I was going to do this thing half time. But when he leveraged like that, and that belief that he showed in us and what we were doing, kind of launched us into this whole thing here. Since then, our church has given away, not taken in, but given away more than $4 million, given over $500,000 to Lexington One School District so that they could give it to guidance counselors and teachers and such to meet needs instantly right when they happen. It comes from that one guy who understood what it means to leverage in your 40s and 50s. And you know, when you leverage like that in your 40s and 50s, you know what you do? You build a great legacy. I used to write that guy a card every year. I'd sit down and write him a personal note, and I'd go, hey, man, out of that $54,000 that you so graciously gave us this year, we gave away $150,000 to benevolence in our community. This year we gave away $500,000 to benevolence in our community. Last one I wrote him, this year we gave $750,000 to benevolence in our community. Gave me the greatest joy in the world because that guy knew how to leverage and he knew how to build a legacy. So in your 40s and in your 50s and beyond, you want to learn how to leverage, because here's the thing about legacy, and I'll close with this. The world's not a fair place, right? We were raising our kids. My wife was great at this. We picked it up. It's not original, but anytime they said something's not fair, she would always say, the fair's in October. I don't really care about fair. All right, fair's in October. Let's talk about life. And I've lived in 4 countries and spent significant time in a dozen more. And I'll tell you what, our playing field is as level as any in the world. It's as fair here as it is anywhere, and it's not fair here. The level playing field is close, but it's not fair. Because you can cheat and connive, and you can weasel your way into fame. You can cheat and tell stories and find great wealth at others' detriment. There's ways you can work the system. You can sort out power and fame and all those things. But the great thing about legacy is you can't cheat on legacy. You can cheat on power and success and wealth, but you can't cheat on legacy. Legacy is the great equalizer. It is what it is. You either earn it or you don't earn it. There is no jockeying that game, and it's beautiful. I do a lot of funerals, and legacy reigns at the funeral. It is supreme. Because unlike so much in our world, I mean, you can't Photoshop your way to a great legacy. I don't care how cool your LinkedIn page is. You can't fool yourself or others about your legacy. You can't get clever accounting and manipulate your way to a great legacy. You got to earn great legacy. And it's a great challenge. And by the way, you don't get legacy by being perfect. You get legacy by being authentic and trending up, not trending down. No perfect people, but there are those who are striving. There was a great king many, many years ago, thousands of years ago. His name was King Solomon, and he said just this one thing: the end of a matter is more important than the beginning. They always say, it's not how you start a race, it's how you finish. The end of a matter is more important than its beginning. And this word legacy, it is the result of being a great learner, being a great leader, leveraging for the right things, and then you build a great legacy, which is what we all want. It's what differentiates us from the animals. Like we desire to do things that matter. We desire to build a legacy. We desire to matter. One of the great philosophers of our time, I was listening to him recently on Joe Rogan podcast, Iron Mike Tyson, and he said it like this, right? I wish I could do a Tyson impersonation, but I can't. This is what he said: Joe, man, your legacy is not what you accomplish. Your legacy is what your kids say about you. They're the ones who really know you. It's probably a little overstated, but there's a lot of truth there. Your legacy is what the people who know you say about you. Hey, listen, the good news is that we could all look at our legacy and we missed a ton of opportunities and we could do a lot better. Every one of us, every day, right? But failure's never fatal. Even a great public fall doesn't have to kill your legacy. You can always regroup and get back to a place. Mike Price, who lost that $10 million over 7 years at the University of Alabama, the next year he landed at UTEP. I think he got to coach there 8 years. I think his sons got to coach with him. Alabama missed that opportunity to do the historic thing and put Sylvester Croom in there. They hired Shula, which led us out in the desert for another 3 years. Then they made a pretty decent hire in Nick Saban. Just because, well, in some people's eyes. So just because you fumbled a ball doesn't mean you can't pick it up and move on. So remember this: be a great learner who becomes a great leader, who leverages for your family, your community, your country, and you'll build a great legacy. The end of a matter is much, much more important than its beginning. Thank you.